Yo everyone, it's Rob Hall and today we're going over the new 70 to 180mm f2.8 zoom lens from Tamron. This lens offers an extremely compelling alternative to the $2,600 Sony 70 to 200mm f2.8 G Master. Before we jump in, I'd like to extend a huge thanks to ASAP Photo and Camera for getting me this lens to check out. If you end up interested in this lens, they've got it in stock in limited quantities, but even more on the way. You can find a link to their listing of the product in the description below. If you're a Sony camera user, you already know the perils of their lens offerings. As the E-mount is young, there is no generational selection of the most popular focal lengths, and third-party manufacturers have only recently begun designing lenses for full-frame E-mount. Where this is shown most is no doubt the holy trinity, that is, 3 zoom lenses from wide to telephoto with an f2.8 maximum aperture. With the release of this 70 to 180mm, Tamron now has a complete trinity that offers a significantly more budget-friendly trio to Sony users. With the Tamron telephoto zoom being $1,200, which is $1,400 cheaper than Sony's G Master, can it stand a chance at matching its performance? First off, let's talk about Tamron's choice of maxing out the zoom at 180mm. This means if you're choosing it over the Sony, you are giving up 20mm at the top end. I shot these two lenses side by side to see exactly what you give up, and at first glance it seems quite minor. Here you can see the Sony frame at 200mm outlined in red atop the Tamron frame at 180mm. A simple small crop will easily bring the Tamron to the exact composition. However, doing some math, you are losing 8.5% of the width and 8.5% of the height to match the crop. This results in a loss of about 18% of your total megapixels. For me, having megapixel monsters like the A7R4 and A7R3, it's extremely minor to lose those pixels, but people will have their own tolerances here. Now, throwing away that top-end zoom range provided something incredible in the most compact 2.8 telephoto zoom ever. The Tamron weighs a mere 810 grams, almost half the 1,480 grams that the G Master weighs. Additionally, when stored, the Tamron is 2 inches shorter than the Sony. The Tamron is a 1/3 inch more narrow with a 67mm filter thread versus the 77mm filter thread on the Sony. That 67mm is handy if you buy the other Tamron E-mount zooms, considering they are all the same thread size. All of this culminates in a lens that is far more comfortable to handle. It feels extremely well balanced on the more narrow Sony bodies, and is light enough to shoot one-handed, just in case you idolize Jason Lanier's shooting mechanics. Now, it's important to note, the Tamron is a grower, not a shower. While it is significantly shorter when it's at its minimum focal length of 70mm, the lens barrel does extend as you zoom the lens. By contrast, the Sony lens zooming is completely internal and its size is consistent regardless of the focal length. For some people, this can be a deal breaker. For one, it means a less durable lens overall. It's a weak point for damage in the event it is dropped. Also, the pressure of zooming in and out does make for a vacuum that can increase your chances of getting dust or moisture inside the lens. The lightweight aspect of this lens is also a product of the materials. It's plain as day that the Tamron 70 to 180mm won't handle the same abuse as the G Master lens, which is built like a tank. Now, some people treat gear like it's precious and don't ever worry about damaging. Others are haunted by accidents in the past. And know that build quality can be a lifesaver. Whatever your opinion, this is hands down the biggest difference between these two lenses. Now, when it comes to image quality, I'm happy to say that the Tamron 70 to 180 really punches up for its price tag. For general sharpness, I found even 1:1 on my 60 megapixel A7R4 that there's an awesome level of detail. The center is always tack sharp, however, there is a bit of corner sharpness when the lens is wide open. I found this more noticeable at the 180mm end rather than the 70mm end. At 70mm, the corner softness is gone by f4. At 180mm, the corner softness persists at a minor level until about f5.6. In general, it's a sharp lens, which doesn't really surprise me. I feel like pretty much everything coming out these days is quite sharp. Side note, that last photo I shared to demonstrate the sharpness is actually a color photo. Isn't that kind of weird? Anyways, while pretty much every lens out there is sharp, what really separates lenses is their ability to autofocus accurately and quickly. And on the 70 to 180, autofocus performance is fast and accurate in most applications. Here's an example of me tracking a skateboarder moving towards me. Throughout the sequence, there are a couple instances of the lens falling behind, but it quickly recovered the subject within a frame. Now, a more demanding example is trying to keep up with my dog. Being that he is full of contrasting lines, it's generally difficult for any lens to maintain tracking on his face. When moving towards me, the lens would often fall behind, although tracking him laterally across a frame was still good. Now, I'm using the A7R4, and while I don't have one, I would assume that using an A9 series camera would yield even better performance and make this lens really suitable for tracking action. Now, I also want to test in situations that really affect autofocus performance, and one of those is backlighting, and this lens still focuses really good with significant backlighting. And while we're on the topic of these backlit images, let's talk about flaring properties. Now, the results that you're going to see are with the lens hood reversed and an unobstructed sun to introduce as much lens flare as possible. Now, I find the character to be quite nice. While there is a significant reduction in contrast, the haziness is really gentle. The lens flares that result are distinct yet soft and really subtle with coloring. Another important characteristic is bokeh, and the bokeh is also fantastic on this lens. For points of light, there's a distinct edge to the bokeh and it renders very circular, a tiny bit of oval shape, and when there's less contrast, the colors really blend together like butter. Now, in talking about this lens before it ever came out, before anybody got to try it, where I saw many concerned about this lens was in focus breathing. That is, when you start to use the lens at a closer focusing distance, the focal length becomes significantly wider. Now, the Tamron does have some impressive magnification levels. The minimum focusing distance is only 33.5 inches, almost 4 inches closer than the Sony G-Master can get. But with the lower maximum focal length, this yields almost the same macro result. To look more into the focus breathing, I compared the two lenses in a head and shoulders image, and I found the Sony had a more compressed background, so I do think it's safe to say that the Tamron has a bit more focus breathing than the Sony, but I really have no idea how to calculate exactly how much. Ultimately, I don't see it as a substantial difference. These two images that I shot do bring up something that I regularly observed when swapping between the lenses. At the exact same settings, ISO, aperture, and shutter speed, the Tamron was always a little bit brighter than the Sony. I'm guessing this is a product of the shorter lens barrel. It's very minor, at most a third stop difference. The time when this was most notable was in the image I showed at the beginning to demonstrate the difference in focal length. All in all, this is a phenomenal lens for the price, and one that I wish existed when I first switched to Sony. The Sony G-Master 2.8 Trinity is a whopping $7,000, and at this point I think all three lenses are due for an update. That's not to say that they're bad, but it's clear with lenses like the 24mm 1.4 and 135mm 1.8 that the G-Master line has reached new heights. The Tamron Trinity, on the other hand, is under $3,000. Had they been available when I switched to Sony, there's no doubt in my mind I would have gone the Tamron route and used the difference in money to fund other prime lenses. And now even today, owning the Sony 70-200mm 2.8, I think the Tamron is a much better buy. It's really a prime example of diminishing returns, that all the extra price of the Sony doesn't come close to justifying its difference in final image quality. That being said, if you are a working pro who is day in, day out, creating images for clients, then the added build quality of the Sony G-Master always have the potential of saving your ass one day. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, this look at the Tamron 70-180mm 2.8 and comparing it to the Sony 70-200. If you did, leave the video a like, subscribe if you want to see more, and comment below with any questions. Again, massive shout out to ASAP Photo for letting me check out this lens. If you guys are interested, the link is in the description below. And if anyone's interested in purchasing a gently used Sony G-Master 70-200 2.8, let me know in the comments below. Till next time, keep on shooting.